Hi guys! I figured I'd show you a couple different bread recipes today just in case that you're stuck at home, don't have access to your normal groceries, or just need something fun to do. So both of these recipes are really made out of staple ingredients in your pantry. So they're not a lot of ingredients, they're not extravagant, they're pretty much your basic white bread recipes. So I'm going to show you two types. The first one is going to use yeast as its raising agent, and the second one is going to use baking soda in case you don't have yeast at home. So they're very simple. This first one is only 5 ingredients. I have flour, I have water, I have salt, yeast, and butter. If you don't have butter, feel free to omit that, and then you'll just have a nice white crusty bread. The second one, like I said, is going to be a soda bread. So that one you will definitely need baking soda, and you will need buttermilk. And if you guys don't have buttermilk, I'll show you a couple of tricks you can use to make buttermilk. So we're going to start with this first one. So this first one is your normal white bread loaf. So what I have 3 cups of flour. I have 1 teaspoon of salt. Show that over here. I have 1.5 teaspoons of yeast. You can use yeast either in the jar or in the packets. The packet of yeast will be a little bit more than the yeast I have right here, but you can seal that back up and pop it in your fridge. I also have 2 tablespoons of butter, and then for water I have 1 1/4 cups. So what I'm going to do, this is super simple. Hands-on time is really not a lot at all. The duration of this is really letting the bread rise, which is called proving, and then you're baking. So to make it super simple, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with my salt. I'm going to put that on one side of the bowl. I'm going to add my yeast on the other side of the bowl. So I don't want to add those 2 ingredients together because what happens is the salt retards the yeast, so that's going to slow down the whole rising process. So adding them on opposite sides of the bowl just kind of prevents them from interacting right off the bat. I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to mix those into my flour just a little bit. And then I'm going to add my butter. My butter should be softened, not melted, just softened, so it should be a nice pliable consistency. And then I'm going to rub that into my flour mixture too. If you guys have an electric mixer, feel free to pop this on there. But I think it's a little bit more fun to use your hands. If you have kids, get them to join in on this too. They can have fun kneading the dough and shaping it once we get to that point. So once my butter is incorporated, I'm going to start adding my water. So I'm going to start off with the 1 full cup. We'll see how much of the 1/4 cup I need when we get there. But same thing, I'm just kind of moving my ingredients around, getting the flour to soak up the water we just added. And it's going to take a little bit of time to bring all of the ingredients together. So it looks like I am going to need that extra 1/4 cup of water. I'm going to add that as well. And we're going to we should get a little bit of a sticky dough. So I'm scraping all the ingredients off the side of the bowl, make sure I have everything nice and incorporated. This will get a little messy, be prepared for that. And then once everything starts to really come together, I'm pressing the flour into the water and forming my dough. I can turn my dough out onto my countertop and I can start to knead it. So what kneading actually does is it builds up the strands of gluten. And so those gluten strands, they're super stretchy, and so we're trying to build those up to make our bread really stretchy and give it that nice texture. If we don't, it's pretty crumbly, and that's what you get in things like a quick bread. So it's going to be a little bit more crumbly. Okay, So everything is pretty much added together. I'm gonna dump it out, and then I'm just gonna knead my dough for about 5 minutes. I'm looking for it to form a nice, smooth, elastic ball. Right now it's kind of chunky. The flour's not really incorporated into it. It looks a little bit shaggy. And we're just gonna work it until we get that nice consistency that we need. There are lots of different ways you guys can knead dough. I'm sure if you look it up, you can see a ton of different techniques. It's really just about moving it around, stretching it. Like I said before, we're trying to build up those gluten fibers. So you can probably see my dough starting to come together a little bit better. It's not sticking to my hands anymore. It actually cleaned my hands off pretty well. It's not looking as chunky or shaggy, but we still have a while to go because if you can see that, it rips apart pretty easily. So we're looking for it to stretch more, kind of hold together as we pull it apart. So I ended up adding about 2 tablespoons extra of water to get more of the consistency that I want. But as you can see now, it's stretching. It's not breaking off in chunks like it did before. And so I am pretty close to what I want my dough to be. And it may have taken me a little bit more than 5 minutes to knead. But that was also because of the extra incorporation of the water. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to shape it into a ball. I'm creating tension by kind of pulling it, the skin on top, around and under. I have my nice little ball. I'm going to use the same mixing bowl I used to mix the dough in, and I'm just going to add a little bit of oil to that, not a lot. We just want to prevent the dough from sticking to the sides. So I'm just going to put my ball of dough in, move it around so that it's covered, and then I'm going to put saran wrap on top of this. If you guys are out of saran wrap, that's okay. A dish towel works really well, and I've actually seen shower caps used before. Not that that's a staple in everybody else's home, but anything to just kind of cover the bowl and create any sort of airflow. So what I'm going to do is just put the saran wrap on nice and tight. Like I said, the hands-on time is relatively short. It's about 10 minutes of kind of mixing and working the dough, and now I'm going to let it rise. So if you guys have a warmer place in your house, kind of like a heat vent or a spot where the sun comes in through the window, go ahead and put this there. It'll just kind of help the process. I'm just going to leave mine out at room temperature. What we're looking for is this ball of dough to now take up the entire bowl. So when we come back, you'll kind of see how it has grown. It is 7:44 right now, so I'll tell you how long it actually took for mine to get to the point that I want it. And I'm just going to let it be. If you guys have something to do and maybe aren't going to be back within an hour and a half, feel free to put this in the fridge. It will also rise in the fridge, but it's going to take a lot longer. So it's going to take a little bit more patience once you bring it out of the fridge, bring it back to room temperature. But if you have more things to do throughout your day, go ahead and put it in the fridge. So I'm just going to set mine next to my oven, room temperature. It'll probably take an hour to an hour and a half to get it where I want to be. So what I'm going to do while I'm letting it rise is we're going to go over the soda bread option. So in honor of St. Patrick's Day yesterday, this is pretty much perfect timing for an Irish soda bread. So stay tuned, we'll get to the soda bread recipe. Okay guys, so here's recipe number 2, which is just going to be a plain soda bread. So for this one I need even fewer ingredients. I have flour, I have 3 cups of flour, I have 1 teaspoon of salt, I have 1 teaspoon of baking soda. Just remember, baking soda is different from baking powder. Baking soda needs an acid to react. So my 4th ingredient here, I have 1 3/4 cup of buttermilk. Now, if you don't have buttermilk, that's okay. There are a lot of options you can do instead of buttermilk, but the key ingredient here is that we have some sort of acid. So I didn't have buttermilk this morning, so what I did instead is I mixed 1 cup of milk with 3/4 cup of Greek yogurt, just like a plain Greek yogurt. On the other hand, what you guys could do, all you need is milk and some sort of acid. So that acid could be yogurt, it could be vinegar, it could be lemon juice. You guys can kind of get creative there. So if you have, which will probably be the most common, if you have milk and vinegar, it's going to be 1 3/4 cup of milk and then 1½ tablespoons of vinegar. So what you're going to do is you're just going to mix that together. Let it sit for about 10 minutes. It's going to curdle. I know, lovely, but that's what we're looking for. That's what buttermilk is. So again, I have my flour, salt, baking soda, and buttermilk. Now, I wanted to jazz mine up a little bit, so what I also have is I have about 1 cup of prosciutto. You guys can really add anything to this that you'd like. If you have cheese, cheddar cheese would be a great option to mix in. If you want to make it on the sweet side, you can mix in maybe about 1 tablespoon of sugar and then any sort of dried fruit. I would just keep your added ingredients on the dry side, so I wouldn't add anything wet to this one. For your flour, if you guys want a bit more texture, you can add up to half of the flour. You could add wheat flour, you could add a combination of oats, something to give it a little bit more bite. So I'm just using plain white flour for this one. So this one's going to go pretty quick. It's a quick kind of all-in-one mixing method. We're going to throw it in the oven and wait for a ½ hour, and then we're going to have our soda bread. So I've already preheated my oven. The oven is set to 400 degrees. It's going to stay that way through the whole bake, so nice and easy on that one. So we're going to start with the flour. We're just going to add everything in. So there in goes my salt, in goes my soda, in goes my prosciutto. And I mixed my prosciutto with a little bit of flour to keep it from sticking together because it's really sticky. So I just kind of add a little bit of flour in as I mixed it so that it's evenly distributed throughout the mix. So I'm just going to mix all those dry ingredients together with my hands, make sure they're evenly distributed. And then we're going to add the buttermilk. So in goes the buttermilk. This is going to be a wet dough. If you've made a quick bread before, it is in that category. So something like banana bread, zucchini bread, something like that. It's a quick bread, so it's a little bit more like a batter rather than a dough. So I'm mixing. I want to be pretty quick with this one because as soon as the baking soda reacts with the acid, it's going to start its chemical reaction. So I'm moving pretty quickly, getting everything roughly mixed together. And then what I'm going to do, I have a lightly floured surface here. I'm going to turn everything out onto it. We're going to do a little bit more mixing. We're really just mixing to get things combined. So in our yeast bread, we did a lot of kneading, so we worked with bread a lot. In this one, we're just looking to get all the flour into it, and then we're going to stop. All those ingredients. If I had like a lump of baking soda left in there, it wouldn't be evenly distributed in my bread and it wouldn't rise correctly. So make sure I kind of get all those little ingredients out. And again, we're just mixing until everything is incorporated. This is gonna help it be a little bit lighter too. If we overmixed this one, it would be super dense. And even though this is a denser bread, we still wanna have as much of a lightness in it as we can. So I'm looking good here. I'm just gonna form it into a ball. I'm gonna pat down the top of it. This is a pretty rough looking bread, so it doesn't have to be beautiful. I'm just kind of patting it into a big pancake. It's maybe 6 inches across. Okay, so I have that there. We're gonna pop that onto the baking sheet. And now this part is important. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut into my bread across. I'm gonna cut big slashes. And I'm gonna cut those slashes almost down to the very bottom. Now the reason we do this is because this is a dense bread and we want it to bake all the way through. So I'm gonna get a sharp knife. And like I said, I'm gonna cut almost all the way through the bread in the shape of a cross. So I'm cutting down pretty deep. All right, now this is gonna go straight in the oven. Okay, we wait a half hour and see what we get. Okay, we're about to take the soda bread out of the oven, so let's see if it's ready. There it is. Looks pretty good. Okay, that has a nice golden crust. What I'm gonna do to make sure that it's ready is I'm actually gonna flip it over and tap it, see if it sounds hollow on the inside. So there we go, we're gonna flip it over. Sounds pretty hollow, I'm happy with that. And now, we'll just leave that baby to cool. Okay guys, so we're back to that first bread, which is just your normal white loaf of bread. So it has been an hour and a half. That's how long I let it prove for the first time, and I'll show you what the bread looks like in its bowl now. So here's my dough. It came up to the very top of that cling film, so I'm pretty happy with that. I could probably let it go another 15 minutes or so, but I told you an hour and a half, so I'm gonna stick to that hour and a half. Also, it is gonna get a second prove, so I can grow it a little bit bigger this next time too. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set that saran wrap aside because I'm actually gonna use it again. I'm gonna turn my bread dough out. And so what we're doing now is we're gonna shape the dough into its loaf form, and then we're gonna let it rise again. So it is gonna go through a second proving process. So I'm just gonna press my dough out. It should be a nice soft dough right now, good texture to it. And I'm actually gonna knock the air out of it and press it into kind of a rectangular shape. Okay, so now that I have it in this rectangular shape, I'm actually gonna roll it up. So I'm gonna start with the edge that's farthest away from me, and I'm just gonna start rolling towards me. If you ever made like cinnamon rolls or something like that, that's kind of what we're doing. So after I rolled it up, I'm gonna form it into a little log. So I'm gonna tuck the ends under, and I'm just forming my loaf right here. I want to make it pretty even throughout so that it doesn't grow into a funny shape. So I'm making it nice and symmetrical. And what shaping the loaf actually does is it creates tension in the top layers of the skin so that when it rises in the oven, it stays in the shape that you want it. So what happens if we don't put that tension there, it can kind of go all sorts of directions and it won't be a nice looking loaf of bread. So once I'm happy with that shape, I'm going to put it onto my baking tray. You guys can line a baking tray with a piece of parchment paper. I have a silicone mat, which I really like to use to bake with. It just keeps everything from sticking and gives it a really nice shape on the bottom. But if you have a piece of parchment paper, that'll work just fine. If you don't have parchment paper, I would just grease your pan and then throw down a little bit of flour so that it doesn't stick to the pan. Or you can use cornmeal, whatever else you have. So I'm happy with the shape of my loaf. I'm going to use that same piece of saran wrap that I had before, and I'm just going to lightly place it over the top of my loaf of bread. You guys can also put this whole tray into a plastic bag and kind of inflate it in the same way. And now I'm going to wait for another hour. All right, so last couple steps with our yeasted white bread. We're ready to bake it now. So it has been rising for an hour after we shaped it into the loaf shape. And as you can see, it's gotten enormous. So the second proof really plumped it up. So now all we have to do is bake it. But right before we bake it, what we're gonna do, first thing I'm gonna do to get a crusty loaf, I'm gonna paint the top of my bread with water. So if you have a pastry brush, you can use a pastry brush. If you don't, just dab a little paper towel in the water and you can do it that way, or use your fingers. Whatever you want to do there is totally fine. If you guys want a soft crust to your bread, you can paint some melted butter or some milk on top of it, and that will keep a nice soft crust on your loaf of bread. So there's the water. And then I'm just going to sprinkle it with a little bit of flour. This is more for aesthetics, honestly. So a little bit of flour. Kind of make sure it gets coated all around. And then this next step is actually important. So a lot of times we see slashes on bread and we think it is for aesthetic purposes, but what the slashes actually do is it gives the bread guidance on where it's going to rise in the oven. So if we don't have the slashes on top, it's going to expand wherever it wants to. So a lot of the times your bread will kind of blow out at the bottom, and we don't want that. We want to control where the steam is coming out, and so we're going to do some slashes on top of the bread. Now I have a razor because I really don't have any sharp knives, but all you need is a sharp knife for this. And what we're going to do is we're just going to do some diagonal slashes right on top of your bread. I'm going to do 4, and we're breaking through that top skin, getting down, maybe we're about a 1/4 inch deep into the bread. So if you can see the slashes on top of there, we have a nice pretty bread. It's ready to go into the oven. So I have my oven heating up to 425. We're going to start this at a little bit of a higher oven temperature. That's going to give it its crust, and that's also going to really help it rise in the first few minutes of baking. So the oven's at 425. After 15 minutes, I'm going to turn the oven down to 400. So we'll put this in, 425, 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes, we'll turn it down, see how it's going, and let it bake the rest of the way. Okay guys, the white bread is ready. Like I said, the first 15 minutes, it was at 425, and then I baked it for another half hour at 400 degrees. And there it is, looking pretty good. Same thing as that soda bread, we can give it a little tap. Sounds pretty hollow. Looks like a decent loaf of bread. Cool it down and ready to eat in the next 15 minutes.